Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Emotions were high as President Obama tried to work out a deal with Congress to extend benefits for the unemployed and tax cuts for the wealthy. Meanwhile, California leads the nation in the number of metropolitan areas with more than 15% unemployment. Arguments on the constitutionality of Proposition 8, which banned same-sex marriage in California, were heard by judges of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals this week. And more than 1 out of 3 African-American students in California drop out before graduating from high school. And a Climate Watch conversation assessing the outcome of the UN Climate Conference in Cancun, Mexico. We'll have those stories next. Good evening, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. I'm Belva Davis. Joining me tonight on our news panel are Jill Tucker, education writer for the San Francisco Chronicle; Howard Mintz, legal reporter for the San Jose Mercury News; and Tom Abate, business reporter at the Chronicle. And Tom, we will start with you. California does have one of the highest unemployment rates in the nation, but how is the Bay Area faring?
Inside the California economy, the Bay Area is a little bit more of an engine. But I think the overarching thing to say, this is a very uneven economy from top to bottom, whether you look at it regionally. Inside the Bay Area, a little bit better than the California's 12+% unemployment rate. Here in the Bay Area, from 9.6 in San Francisco, the hottest part of the job market, Silicon Valley starting to heat up. East Bay still hit by housing and harder. The rest of the state depends on how close it was to the housing crisis. And of course, as we were discussing earlier, Belva, it depends on who you are in this economy. Are you a high school dropout? Are you a person of color? Are you in the inner city? Are you low income? Are you male versus female? A very uneven recession. And the men have been hit harder in this recession than women. If you think about who was swinging hammers, it was men. And they're now not swinging those hammers. 25% unemployment in construction. In places like Oakland and Richmond, where you have high African-American populations, nationwide, I don't know what the granular information is for here, but nationwide, as many as 45% of young African-Americans are unemployed. It's a catastrophe.
So this emergency is being seen through the eyes of President Obama, and he is getting a lot of discomfort from the remarks of his fellow Democrats.
Well, what's happening here, something that I did recently that would be enlightening in this discussion is I went to Stanford University and I heard some very big business people talk about what they saw about the world, and they didn't feel the love from Obama. The business community feels that it is being vilified and put upon. I think very largely that this is a widely held fear or feeling. And one of the leaders was Steve Jurvetson, a venture capitalist, and he said, the overarching problem, I'm paraphrasing, is income inequality. Now, this is a venture capitalist, and he doesn't particularly want to see an interventionist government policy, but what's happened in the last 20 to 30 years is increasingly a society of haves and have-nots in this recession. If you happen to be, as Steve Jurvetson said, if you speak the lingua franca of technology or biotechnology, you're golden. However, if you worked with your hands, if you had a service job, if you had a manufacturing job, you've been scrounging.
So why are the Republicans, who are often supported by business, why are they pushing so hard for these continued tax cuts to the wealthy, which theoretically is going to affect a very small number of people?
It's not just the wealthy, and it's really important here. We got to start to find common ground. And Sunday, I hope that Bay Area readers will take a look at something that we're going to put in the business section of the Chronicle of the soul searching in economics. There is not yet a consensus among these smart people who missed the crisis, let's say that, about whether or not even things like the Obama stimulus were a good thing or a bad thing, and whether the tax cuts are a good thing or a bad thing. Now, I tend to believe that right now, I'm more aligned with the Keynesians, or I've seen more of the Keynesian argument from Christina Romer at UC Berkeley to say this thing was so deep, so big, that if you're going to give it a jolt, you're going to give it a big jolt. Well, the Democrats got their jolt, and they did it their way. And I think if you want to look at it cynically or practically, the Republicans are going to get their jolt, and they're going to do it mostly their way this time.
Every month there's another set of statistics that come out on job numbers, hiring. It's dizzying. There was even some dispute this week about the accuracy of various sets of numbers. We seem to be stuck in neutral.
I think that's probably where we are right now.
And so the question is, I mean, what do we read from the latest numbers? Is that dangerous to even do? Because these things don't change in a month.
Well, I think that neutral is a little better than where we were a couple of months ago. We started the year pretty strong, and everybody was really optimistic. And then we hit some period in the spring, April, May, June, things started to slow down. Activity, I think, is heating up, and a lot will depend on how strong or not this holiday season is, right? A lot of the retailers are expecting a decent year for the first year in several years. And if that happens, we'll go into 2011 with a little more confidence, a little more dynamism. But the thing is, this is not a recession as in, gee, demand fell off and now we're going to slowly call it back. This was a complete reordering. The financial system, it's a complete reordering of the manufacturing and distribution systems. And with the health care, one of the things that the business community talks about is with the health care plan coming on, whether you support it or not, it creates uncertainties, it creates new mandates, and everybody freezes and pauses.
Well, going back to the original question, how is the Bay Area or California in general poised to sort of absorb this new world or economic order in terms of, you know, we're not going to get that manufacturing back. We're not going to have some of those. All of it. But are we ready for whatever's coming next to have the jobs, to have?
That's part of what, when we talk about education in the Bay Area. So here's our blessing. We do have some of the best minds and the most dynamic sectors of the economy. San Francisco is really cooking. If you know what Ruby on Rails is, probably no, but if you did, I could get a bonus for bringing you into the right store in the right shop in South Park. This is a web development tool. So San Francisco is totally alive as the place where you create the user interfaces that are going to attract millions of eyeballs to some application online. Silicon Valley, the South Bay, reading more encouraging things about the making of widgets. We're not going to give up, by the way. We're going to make them. The East Bay, I'm a little bit lagging, I'm afraid.
You mentioned the unemployment rate among minority youth, and particularly African Americans. Some people see this whole job crisis through the eyes of a civil rights actions being needed, or that there needs to be some rules changed. And so we move to another story that has to do with civil rights, not to do with jobs, but to do really with human rights, and that is the story behind Proposition 8, which continues to live on through the courts. This week we saw a milestone in that case.
Yeah, it's going to live on for some time. 3 appeals court judges heard arguments in the case. They're considering the August decision by Judge Walker here in San Francisco that found Proposition 8 unconstitutional. We spent Monday's arguments sort of reading tea leaves, as we often do when they hold these hearings. The Ninth Circuit is notoriously liberal. This panel's a bit of a mix. One thing was abundantly clear. This is not a panel that appeared inclined to find Proposition 8 constitutional. In one form or another, they were finding problems with this law. The question is what path they're going to take. They can go from the most expansive view of this and really set this up for U.S. Supreme Court review on the ultimate question, which is whether same-sex couples should have a constitutional right, equal right to marry, which is the fundamental issue in this case. Or they could go to the most narrow, and that is whether the sponsors of Proposition 8 really at this stage of the game have a legal right to be in court. So
Which I actually think is one of the most interesting aspects of this, that currently none of the defendants are actually fighting for this. So that's sort of how did the judges react to that situation? Do they have to rule on that first in terms of we're going to let you fight this, or can they just sort of say we're going to address the constitutionality even though technically the defendants aren't here?
They're going to have to address that issue in order to get to the constitutional question. In one fashion or another, they're going to have to deal with that. We're in this odd posture. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and Governor-elect Jerry Brown, as Attorney General, have declined to press this appeal. They agree with Judge Walker's decision that this law is unconstitutional, and they're not here. They're not in court. And that's created this odd posture in the case where there is a serious question about whether the sponsors of a ballot initiative have a right to defend a state law when the state won't defend it.
Is there, how common or uncommon is it for the Supreme Court to tell the voters no on a constitutional amendment?
In terms of the U.S. Supreme Court jumping in here at some point?
Or the state Supreme Court, which is,
Well,
this is already at the federal
Ninth
appeal,
Circuit.
yeah.
This is the federal level. We're done with the state level. The Ninth Circuit, it's not uncommon for the federal courts to step in and find that a state, even a voter-approved law, violates the constitutional rights of the people. I mean, that's what the federal courts are there for. One of the judges at the hearing the other day said to the Proposition 8 lawyer, well, what if the voters wanted to reinstate segregation in schools? I mean, could they just do that because it's a vote of the people and that's what the majority wanted? And, it was obviously a rhetorical question because, even the Prop 8 lawyers like, no, this is different. So it would not be unusual for this court to find that Prop 8 is unconstitutional. This has all been set up as a path to the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, and how it gets there and whether it gets there is really the end game here.
But it doesn't seem the way that people were talking after the hearing the other day, that even though this is now in the federal path to the Supreme Court, that this would necessarily be the case that creates a national policy or law or legal precedent for gay marriage in every state. It still looks like that this, whatever happens at the end of this case, is going to be a very perhaps localized decision that affects California only?
Again, it depends on the path the Ninth Circuit takes. They can go narrower. They can, for example, say California, Proposition 8 stripped away a prior right that had been established in that state Supreme Court ruling of 2008. Or they could say, we find that this is a violation of the federal Constitution, equal protection rights. That ruling alone would apply to 9 Western states. And it would invite the Supreme Court in, and if the Supreme Court rules on the fillet of this issue, that will obviously apply nationwide.
When will we know?
My guess is there's no deadline for the Ninth Circuit, but we will probably hear from them in the first quarter of next year. I would imagine by springtime.
And then either on to the Supreme Court or not.
It won't be over there, that's for sure.
Oh, we were talking earlier about education and its tie-in to the jobs issue and the dropout rate for minority youngsters. Jill, tell us more about that.
Well, the newest dropout rates came out this week. They're actually a year late, so we're talking about data that goes back to 2009 because the state has a new system for counting and they had bugs in this system. But what they found was that overall 22% of high school students drop out before they graduate. That's up 3 points. Probably because we're counting them slightly better, maybe not necessarily because of a worsening situation, although that's possible. But the real numbers that came out that I think shocked a lot of people were the dropout rates for minority students. African American students, for example, are at 37%, almost 40%, which is a very, very shocking, crazy number to even think about, and 27% for Hispanic students. Asian and white students are much lower than that. So it really, I think when people saw these numbers, 37%, it really is It's just shocking, and to think, and then you have the repercussions down the road. I mean, if these kids are not getting a high school diploma, they're the ones who are unemployed during the next recession.
That's the question, Jill. I mean, who's tracking this? I mean, is anybody tracking this? What becomes of these kids? I mean, where do they go?
You know, we've looked at this, and we've done some stories looking at long-term what happens to these kids. And the reality is this number goes down. These kids don't all stay as high school dropouts or non-graduates for their whole lives. A lot of these kids come from poverty and violent neighborhoods and a lot of things. And their path to graduation isn't a straight shot from kindergarten to 12th grade graduation day. Sometimes it takes them longer. Sometimes they leave and come back. And what we found is a lot of these kids eventually do graduate, but it does leave this gap and this question mark about their future if they're not graduating on time, they're not graduating with their peers. It's a lot harder, I mean, you can imagine, to go back to school once you're older.
Jill, you've been reporting on these numbers for a number of years, right, on this program. It's hard to find who's accountable. It's hard to find even a study that people can agree upon. After looking at it all this time, some of your thoughts about what have you written about that says, how do we stop this hemorrhaging?
You know, the first thing that came to mind when I saw these numbers and everybody sort of opened their mouth, put their hand up and went, shocking. And I thought, it was shocking last year too, and the year before, and the year before that, and all the times that I've been on the show going, oh my gosh, look at the rate. I think the schools obviously take responsibility to a certain degree. Jack O'Connell, the state superintendent, was pointing the finger at budget cuts. We don't have the summer school so these kids can make up courses. We don't have career tech to get them interested in school or art or music or all those things that really help kids find that joy in school that they might not find in an algebra class.
So could we say that the recession has something to do with this because of the budget cuts?
It's possible.
At all different levels?
Yeah, these numbers were bad before. They're probably worse, slightly worse now. So sure, a recession is going to make it worse.
Unevenness is the name of the game, and what's happening is America is not the fluid, climbing society that it was, and it's getting harder when something breaks, once people fall out this decisively and this large. And even again, if I go back to where does a kid get his first job or her first job? It's from a neighborhood merchant. That's where we got them from. And if you go into those poorer communities, you don't see the neighborhood stores. You don't see the infrastructure that's out there to help these kids go the right way instead of the wrong way.
I would imagine the budget would play in where there's not enough resources to intervene when they're in trouble. We were talking earlier about you get to junior year or senior year, you're so far behind because you don't have summer school, you don't have this.
And I think it's important to state it's not the school's fault per se. I mean, they're not forcing these kids to drop out. They care very much that these kids don't drop out. So it's society issues and things like that. But I think ultimately the schools are the place where they have to address it. And right now they're saying they don't have the money.
So we're seeing that we have a recession, we have high unemployment, and we have high dropout rate, which all sort of moves around in a circle.
These kids are our next unemployed.
Right. Yeah. Well, my thanks to all of you for joining me here tonight. Well, representatives from around the world gathered in Cancun, Mexico over the past 2 weeks for the 16th annual United Nations Climate Change Conference. Craig Miller, senior editor for KQED's Climate Watch, assesses the outcome with Louis Bloomberg, director of the Nature Conservancy's climate change team.
Louis Bloomberg, it looks like you found a nice spot to talk to us for a few minutes. Looks like the weather is better than it was in Copenhagen last year. You've been to a few of these now. Can you start by explaining what is the role of an organization such as yours, like the Nature Conservancy, in this process?
Well, Craig, thank you for the opportunity to be here. The Nature Conservancy is a global organization. We bring people in from many countries around the world and develop a consistent platform to promote nature-based solutions to climate change. So we try to affect the outcome of the negotiations by talking to people.
So you're both an observer and, in a sense, a kind of lobbyist down there. Let's tap into some of your observations. This one is starting to wind down now. Given what many would say is a failure at Copenhagen last year, and given the fact that carbon regulation is off the table, I should say, in this country, at least for now, what can we really expect out of this one?
Well, we're looking for a balanced package of measures that can take us forward into the next year. They're making significant progress on many of the issues, including issues of policy that would prevent emissions from deforestation. A couple of key issues are still being debated, the issue of transparency and the issue of the future of the Kyoto Protocol. So right now we're waiting to see what the final outcome is going to be.
So this would be the Kyoto Protocol, meaning the treaty that's going to expire in a couple of years. There's been talk of extending that. What do you mean by transparency?
Well, transparency really deals with accountability. When countries report emissions, there needs to be some kind of process to make sure that what they say they're doing, they're actually doing.
We're not going to get the kind of global binding agreement to reduce emissions out of this that ultimately we were hoping this process would lead to, right?
We hope to get a suite of building blocks that the final treaty next year can really incorporate. It's all about environmental integrity. We want to make sure that the emissions reductions really happen.
California has had an interesting kind of presence at these talks. They were there last year, of course. The state was there. The governor was there. Now this year, neither the governor nor the governor-elect chose to even go. Is that significant in any way? And what exactly has been the role of California in this process, given that the state's leadership in this area is pretty much acknowledged around the world?
Well, I would agree with you that California's leadership on this issue is well acknowledged. There have been a couple of California officials. Linda Adams, the Secretary of the California Environmental Protection Agency, is here. And she and I and others from California have been sharing the lessons learned from California experience.
Do you think those lessons are sinking in at all from what you've been able to observe?
Well, very much so. For example, last night there was a big side event, we call them. It was a big seminar on avoided deforestations from tropical forest countries. And this linked up to the Governor's Summit just the week before last. So California is working on a program with other states around the world to work together at the state level. We're not waiting for action at the federal level. So state-to-state action is really proven to be a really powerful tool here in Cancun to motivate the national governments to come to the table.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Now, you personally have been very involved in something called RED, which stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. This is an area in which, as you say, states, subnational actors have been able to get together and make a little bit of progress on their own. What is happening on that front?
Well, there's been some good progress here at the international level on developing a decision on RED. Basically, nobody disagrees that we must reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. Loss of forest accounts for 12 to 15% of the annual greenhouse gas emissions. We won't be able to address climate change if we don't stop emissions from forest loss. So parties are coming together on this, and they were working out the details. And this would be one of those building blocks that could carry forward to the next year.
Also, last year at Copenhagen, Governor Schwarzenegger floated an idea for something called R20, which was a group of these subnational groups formally to band together. Is anything happening on that front down there?
Yes, there is, Craig. Again, just yesterday, there was another one of these events. It's like another trade show, a side event or seminars. There was a side event focused on R20, announcing that further. As you may recall, just 2 weeks ago at the Governor's Global Summit, 40 different parties signed onto the R20 arrangement. So that process is going forward. Again, it's state-to-state action, state-to-province. It's people getting together, not waiting on the national government to act.
Well, speaking of that, you know, in just a few days, the Air Resources Board in California is probably going to formally approve a cap-and-trade program for California. But in a time when it seems like few others around the world are willing to do this, does it make any sense for California to move forward with that?
Very much so. California needs to continue to move forward. If California was a country, it would be the 8th largest economy of the world, and it would also be the 12th largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So reducing emissions to 1990 levels by 2020 will have an impact, and it sends a very clear message, especially coming on the heels of the defeat of Prop 23, which we think is the largest vote ever on climate change. Over 4 million people went to the polls on November 2nd and voted affirmatively for climate action. So we got the plebiscite in favor, and now we have the state policy coming together. We're very excited about the progress that California is going to make. We continue to work aggressively in that process to make sure that forests are included in that, and we're happy that they are. On the vote next Thursday, there will be a forest carbon offset provision for forest projects in the United States.
Louis Bloomberg, thanks for taking a few minutes out from the conference to talk to us.
Thank you, Craig. My pleasure. I wish you were down here.
So do I.
Well, to learn more, you can tune into the California Report on KQED Public Radio Monday morning to hear how saving forests can help cut emissions. And to watch segments and episodes of our program, go to kqed.org/thisweek. You'll also find a link to the in-depth conversation I had with Oakland's Mayor Ron Dellums about what it's meant to be mayor and what he feels he's accomplished as he leaves that office. Thank you for watching This Week in Northern California. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.
Funding for Climate Watch on This Week in Northern California is provided by the Mary Van Voorhees Fund and the Follis Family Fund.